Hello and welcome to the apiary. Today we're going to talk about hot hives, in particular bearding. Bearding. Bearding is this behavior we see here, where bees come outside of a hot hive and stay on the surface. This is one of the tricks bees can use to cool a hive. Hives want to be 98 degrees in the brood rearing area, but during high temperature conditions, they can overheat if they don't do some things to control that temperature. And this is one of the things they can do to control that temperature. By these bees coming outside, much like us going out onto the porch, they're no longer adding to the heat load inside the colony. The act of just maintaining your cells, cellular respiration, creates heat that we exhale. Bees are no different. So if these bees were inside the hive, they'd be adding to the heat load. By being outside, their heat discharges the atmosphere. There's two other main ways bees control heat in the hive or reduce heat in the hive. One, I can hear it. And we'll see if we can catch it on the camera here. You see these girls there? They're fanning. They are either pulling air in or pushing air out of the colony, depending which direction they point in. And believe it or not, bees can figure out if they should be pulling or pushing by the vector currents they feel, courtesy of the hairs on their body. You can actually see the bees are inside the hive, pulling the hot air out. There's bees all throughout the colony that are doing this fanning. These are just the ones we can see from here. What they are doing is either bringing air in or exhausting air out to cool the hive. These hives somewhat function like a chimney where hot air rises. So you can push cold air in at the bottom, push hot air out at the top. Now, we can control that a little bit or influence that by how our hives are put together. Now, these are all nukes. A lot of my nukes are on solid bottom boards, something like this. And this is nice if you want to control airflow, but if you want to keep airflow out, rather. But if you want to allow airflow, very limited what you can do. You can either not use an entrance reducer. I like entrance reducers because I have robbing issues if I don't come late summer. You can also use screen to cover part of that entrance like a reducer. That'll still allow airflow, but also still limits the amount of bees that can come and go. The other option with your bottom boards is to use something like this. This is a screen bottom board with a insertable IPM board, this plastic board that goes in here. The perk about these is you can remove this and give them boatloads of airflow at the bottom to help cool the hive down. Now, anyone who's worked on building insulation can also tell you if you have an opening at the bottom, if you don't have an opening at the top, it's not really going to improve airflow. So we need to think about the top of the hive as well. A lot of us use inner covers that look like this. They have this hole here, that's a Porter bee escape sized hole, and this little entrance notch. And when this is on top of the hive, this allows airflow, but not terribly much. What a lot of people will do is take something like popsicle sticks to put above this, so between the inner cover and the outer cover, just to increase airflow. Another tactic some people use, and we'll see this in the next apiary we visit, is they'll put additional ventilation holes in here. The kind of peak you can do with this is actually something called a screened inner cover. Now, this is a relatively uncommon piece of equipment. This is mostly used for bee moving. And again, if you put this on top of the hive, you need to be able to float the outer cover so it doesn't just seal up the surface. If I have hives that are persistently beardy, that just love to beard, sometimes I'll throw this on them and see if that cures it. This honestly is more used for moving hives because you can have hive kills because they're stuck inside while moving them, but these are an option. The other main way bees handle heat is evaporative cooling. Much like me spraying these bees with this water bottle or spraying myself off with this water bottle, when water evaporates, that's an endothermic phase change. It absorbs heat, so it cools when you do this. Now, bees don't miss themselves. Bees actually will collect water and go inside the hive, and they'll use their mandibles to kind of make a water balloon, if you will, or a water bubble. Bees can use their mandible and proboscis to increase the surface area of this water droplet, increasing how fast it evaporates. Bees can actually use this to cool the hive or to cool their own bodies while they're outside of the hive, like if they're foraging and overheating. The bees will also take water droplets and place them on the combs, either on top of capped cell cappings or rimming a cell, or put a water droplet at the top of a cell. This further increases the amount of surface area of water within the hive and greater increases evaporative cooling. Between these water droplets and the fanning done by the other bees, the bees have bootlegged their way into a swamp cooler or an evaporative cooler system. So they're creating evaporative cooling inside the hive to keep those hive temperatures controlled. Now, there's actually bees that specialize in water collection. During this time of year, especially if there's a dearth and no nectar flow, water can be the main thing the bees are collecting. And within the hive is also a group of bees that are water tankers. They just hold on to large amounts of water for the hive to use. Now, their importance is keeping the hive cool at night when bees can't go out and collect water. They actually, testing, experimenting, they put hives on a lava flow like you do. And the hives were able to maintain proper brood temperature until the water tanker bees ran out of water in the middle of the night. And that's when the hive actually succumbed and overheated. Another management choice is to provide a water source for your bees. In this setup here, I have a downspout directed into a stock tank with some blocks to make sure there's always a spot for the bees to land on and descend to the water safely. Sometimes this is a very busy water source. Right now it isn't. So the bees have found something they find preferable, even though this is really close to their location. A lot of times bees like the water as funky as they can get it, and there's a couple stock ponds to the rear of my property they're probably taking advantage of. Now my apiary has some rather average hives with some rather average equipment. So I have some amount of bearding, especially on the less ventilated stuff. Some people have waged a war on bearding, and they do a lot of stuff to keep their bees inside. Now, caveats, it's not something you have to do. Bees can beard. This isn't causing problems per se. They can get wet. They're not going to melt if they get wet. Now, if a hailstorm comes through and blasts everything, different story. But most weather conditions won't bother these bees in that regards. It does look a little alarming to the uneducated because there's just bees everywhere, and we're trained to think bees are mean. We know bees are kind of docile things, assuming you got the right ones, but really it's not an issue. Now, I will say this. If they're out here, they're not inside the hive working for you. So I don't know if that is a good thing or a bad thing. There's always an amount of bees inside of the hive that aren't doing anything. But if they're out here, I know they're not curing nectar or rearing brood. So getting them inside might be a more efficient thing if you can get the hive ventilated and get them to go back in. I've also had some hives that just love to beard, and there's nothing you're going to do to stop them. So anyway, let's go to someone else's apiary who uses some different practices to reduce this behavior. Speaking of that war on bearding, this is Don Chesick's apiary. Don Chesick's back there messing with a queenless hive, getting things squared away to do a combine. And it is just as hot as it was in my apiary over here, but there are no beards to be seen besides the one on my chin. Don is one of the admins on the Beekeeping Hack groups, and he very aggressively manages bearding in his own apiary. And it's by addressing those things that reduce heat in the hive. His inner covers have more ventilation than mine do. He has screen bottom boards with slatted racks, and we'll take a look at a slatted rack here shortly. All right, so this hive is a dead end, and we can look at this just to see the parts in it without harassing too many bees. This is an old Kelly polytop, which is a plastic blow molded thing. And these have these runner rails that just keep them floated a little higher, so it keeps the hive a little cooler. Now, an example of the more old traditional wooden tops, what he does is he adds these wooden shims just to create more airflow. So he's got airflow moving around this end, and this end on these hives. You can see what his inner cover looks like here. So we have these 2-inch holes covered with number 8 hardware cloth, maximizing airflow. And Don has this little thing in here because he doesn't like having a wide open entrance on the top. If it's a weak colony, it gets parked square over the hole to lock out that access point. But if the colony's strong enough, he'll walk it back to give them one bee space. So they even still have an entrance on the top, even with that setup. Down in here is a piece of equipment many people have not messed with before. This is a slatted rack. And the way it is built, these rails line up with the tails of the frames in the hive. So the frames are hanging about here, and that gives bees space to festoon here and underneath these rails. So the bees can stay inside the hive, but they're not as tightly clustered on the comb itself, and it kind of helps them thermoregulate a little bit more efficiently in the hot weather. And he has water in all these foot pans of his stand, so the bees have ready access to water in this apiary. So the bees do a pretty good job of controlling the heat themselves. With that, we've covered the basics of hot hives in the summertime and how we can influence how those hives are interacting with their environment. With that, if you like my content, please like and subscribe to the channel. That is how the algorithms recommend my videos to other beekeepers. And I'll say good luck and happy beaking. They're going inside, aren't they?